Are you a know-it-all? Are you the kind of person that you've done something one time and now you're kind of the expert at it because you've done it once? Are you that person? Or maybe you know someone who's like that. And maybe I'm asking for a friend, right? One of those kinds of deals. I have three young boys, and so it's kind of funny to see that, because if I let them do something, they're going to say, "Oh, I know how to do that." I think I have a young one who says, "Oh, I know how to drive a car." No, you really don't. So maybe you've seen that before. Thanks for joining us. I'm Pastor Andrew. We're going through the Gospel of Mark in a devotional series and celebrating Jesus the King. And today we're in Mark chapter 6, and we're in two separate parts of Mark chapter 6. We're going to go through verses 7 to 13 and then 30 to 44 and tie these two pieces together within this chapter. Humility is a really important virtue, and I would imagine, if you're honest with me, we struggle sometimes with humility, don't we? We just want to be celebrated, and we want the accolades, and we want to sort of be recognized for what we've done rather than do it secretly and in a corner, or even be willing to listen. So in this passage, we learn from that. Jesus, of course, the great teacher, the great leader that he is with his disciples. And in verses 7 to 13 in Mark chapter 6, we see that Jesus sends out the disciples. And so he says, go. And all of the layers within how he tells them to travel is really cool. If you were to take the time to look at the couple different times that he sends out the disciples, they're each a little bit different. And so there's purpose in it. I mean, there's intention. And in this particular case, he says, travel light. Don't take an extra tunic, and don't take a money bag or a beggar's bag. Don't take any of those kinds of things, and trust God for your provision. Stay in the same place. And he goes on and on. But go out there and preach the gospel and heal the sick and cast out demons in my name and all of these wonderful things. And so they do. And then we get sort of brought up to speed on John the Baptist's story, which we talked about in the previous devotional. And now then we jump into verses 30 to 44, and it's the feeding of the 5,000. And I think what's so cool about this particular passage is that we're going to find that when the disciples have come back, after we've learned a little bit more about John the Baptist, the disciples come back. And I really think this is fascinating how this is worded. And so we see in verse 30, it says that the apostles gathered around Jesus and they told him everything that they had done and taught. It's like they were so excited, having come back from their little mission that Jesus had sent them on. And maybe you can relate to that. I can relate to that, preaching the gospel and getting the opportunity to share your faith with somebody, and how exciting that is, especially when it's accepted or they're responsive to the message about who Jesus is. That's exciting. I mean, there's really nothing like that feeling of doing something for God and it's received and there's a good response. There's nothing like that in the world. That's been my experience. So they gathered around Jesus and they were so excited to tell him, man, here's what we did. We're so excited to tell you the story. And Jesus says in verse 31, he said, come with me privately to an isolated place and rest for a while. And I'm kind of maybe inserting into that context, let's go talk about it. Let's isolate ourselves. Let's go rest, because the crowds were gathering, we see in this story. Let's go rest a little bit and let's talk about your experiences on this mission field. But then we read the story of the feeding of the 5,000, that the crowds just gathered and the disciples and Jesus could not get away. So they were never able, in this particular moment, it seems like they were never able to really get to that isolated place to sort of unpack their experiences that I'm sure the disciples were so eager to unpack with Jesus and spend time with him, to say, we have so many questions. This was wonderful, and all the stuff that we did. And so I think what's funny is we read this story about feeding the 5,000, and we see that the crowds are gathered and Jesus has compassion for the crowds, even though he may be tired. This is another great principle for us to learn. He may be tired, he may be exhausted, but he's so compassionate towards the people that he gives towards the people. He loves the people. He's going to teach them anyway. He sees the people in need, and so he helps for them. That's a good challenge for us. So the disciples have come back, and now we have this crowd of people, and they need to go away and eat. And so now then the disciples are going to start giving Jesus advice. And the disciples tell Jesus, well, Lord, we're kind of in an isolated place. So what we need to do is send them away so that they can go eat. I think that's kind of funny, because it's sort of like, now here the student has become the teacher. And so Jesus had sent them out. Now they've come back. They're excited to tell him about their stories. They're in the situation where they have 5,000 men, besides even women and children, gathered around that Jesus is teaching. And they're going to give Jesus some advice to say, well, in my ministry experience, Lord, I think this is a large crowd. We don't have enough. We need to send them away now so they have time. Let's plan this conference. I think it's kind of funny. And so Jesus, of course, once again, uses this as an opportunity and says, you give them something to eat. You feed them. And let's figure this out. And so then another teaching opportunity comes into play. And so the disciples, hopefully in this moment, learn a little bit more about humility when we read this amazing miracle that 5,000 plus are fed just with loaves, a few loaves and fishes. That's an amazing story and miracle from the Bible. So hopefully they learn that, and then now they're humble and they're not a know-it-all. Well, yeah, I've traveled and done ministry, so I know how this all works. But there's a humility there, and that's something that we can learn from as well. So consider that, chew on that. We'll see you next time.